I worked nights at a diner off Highway 24, a narrow strip of counter and red vinyl booths you could miss if you blink at the wrong mile marker. The sign still says Linda S., even though Linda sold the place a decade ago and moved to Florida. The bulbs in the L and the D flicker when the air compressor kicks on, so most nights it reads in A's, which is about as honest as a place like this gets. You don't come here because you want to. You come because you're out of options. Snow chains biting into asphalt, or you took the wrong exit, or you're too tired to trust what your eyes are doing behind the wheel. I'm the overnight cook, which really means everything. Wipe the grill, slice the pies, restock the salad cooler, kill the roaches without making a scene, pretend not to hear the truckers comparing the weight of what they rehauling to the weight of their mistakes. The graveyard shift is easy if you don't mind the sound of the soda gun whining in an otherwise quiet universe. We've got an old CCTV system that looks like something from a pawn shop that changed hands too many times. 4 black and white monitors bolted into a steel frame above the coffee station, labeled Cam 1 through Cam 4 on tape, that's turned the color of weak tea. Cam 1 covers the front door and register. Cam 2 looks down the counter. Cam 3 points at the back hallway, where the freezer and dry storage live, and Cam 4 sits over the back lot like an impatient owl. On a dead night, I'd look up and catch the world in grayscale. My hands, the grilled cheese, the steam lifting off the coffee like cigarette smoke. It felt like a spell that stretched time, turning 10 minutes into a kind of long ache. The first strange thing happened on a Sunday, late enough that Monday was pushing through the door cracks. I had a pot of chili going, leftovers from the dinner rush, and I was mopping the floor in lazy arcs, thinking about how the handle always left splinters in the heel of my hand. The bell over the door didn't ring. No one came in, but on Cam 1, the glass door opened and a woman stepped inside, like the night had decided it could grow a person out of pure coal. She wore a quilted coat, and her hair was in a loose braid that had fought and lost against the wind. She walked to the corner booth, the one under the neon clock that permanently reads 2:14, and sat. On the counter in front of me, nothing changed. No footprints on wet tile, no bell jingle, no whiff of the cedar perfume old ladies carry like weaponized memory. But on the monitor, she looked real enough to ring up, and I stared until my eyes blurred and watered. I set the mop in the bucket like it was a microphone I no longer needed, and stepped around the counter, making sure to look at the floor, expecting, hoping, to see water tracked in across the entryway. Nothing. I went to the corner booth and stared at the cracked vinyl. The salt shaker there always clumps because it's too close to the warmth from the coffee machine, and sometimes the glass fogs. I put my hand flat on the table, dry. On Cam 1, the woman was looking up at me, except I just wasn't there in her world. She raised her hand like she was about to wave, hesitated, and instead reached for a menu. I waved at the monitor like an idiot. The woman glanced up again, and then looked past where I would have been, as if the silence carried a different man's footsteps. I turned the monitor off at the side switch, a junky plastic rocker that feels like it only ever chooses between 2 equal mistakes. The screen went black. I let myself breathe and counted to 10, which lasted forever. When I flipped it back on, the woman wasn't on Cam 1 anymore. She was on Cam 2. She sat at the counter now, 3rd stool from the end. The one with the wobble we keep meaning to fix. And she had a steaming mug in front of her. I can't emphasize this enough. I had just had my hand on that exact stretch of Formica, feeling whether a coffee ring had dried into a sticky halo, and there was nothing there. But in the feed, she lifted the mug with both hands, like it weighed more than it should have, and she breathed the steam in like it belonged to a life she'd lost. My heart did what hearts do when the past tries to enter through the wrong door. It stuttered, then decided to break the line entirely and sprint ahead to see if the body would follow. I walked to the place the mug should be and turned slowly, like somebody in a stage play. It was just air, a greasy napkin, a knife with a nick from the dishwasher, a sugar caddy missing 2 packets because I had them in my apron. The mug was only in the sky of that screen, in a world that smelled like the coffee I hadn't poured. I did the thing you do when you feel a little crazy, which is you try to make your hands busy. I tucked my apron strings tighter and walked like my legs belonged to a different man. I moved the mop bucket back to the janitor closet. I pretended the chili needed stirring. I checked the fry oil by lowering the thermometer into a quiet shimmer. I tried to become a list of verbs instead of a person, because verbs don't panic. When I finally looked up again, the woman stood near the register on Cam 1, looking toward the door as if she were leaving, and had remembered something too late. She put one hand to her throat, like a person checking for a necklace that wasn't there. Then she turned and reached into her coat pocket and took out something small and metallic. She held it out to the counter, like she might set it down, and she hesitated. Then she pulled it back and tucked it into her glove, which she then placed flat on the glass case, where we keep the pie under domes. And then she was gone. I didn't see her leave. The bell didn't sound. The door on the monitor opened and shut, and the handle in the real world sat perfect and still. When I walked to the glass pie case, I thought I'd find the glove. I was ready to be mercifully sane, but there was nothing there except the reflection of my own pale face, the diner behind me like a stage set, and the smudge someone left earlier when they leaned in to admire the lemon meringue. I told myself I was overtired, and that old machines do old machine things. Static don't need a reason. Ghosts live in cathode ray tubes without bothering God. I wiped the case, reset the domes, and reminded myself that I am a man who has drilled new handles into doors, who has replaced fuses in the back room with my fingers cold and my breath smoking in front of me, who has stood on the back lot and told stray dogs to move along and watched them obey. If this was going to be a night of the monitors trying to persuade me that I lived in 2 separate versions of the same place, I would do what you do with a drunk at the counter, keep everything friendly and distant, and wait for dawn to do its work. The second night, it got worse. We had a run of truckers around midnight. Coffee, hash browns, a language that is half code and half regret. And then the lot drained like rainwater down a clogged drain. By 2, it was empty. I refilled ketchup bottles and wiped the grill and then leaned against the back counter and let myself stare up at the monitors because I didn't know how not to. The feeds did their gray humming, a jitter in Cam 4 as the compressor kicked on, the hypnotic line that flickers up the right edge of Cam 3 like an electrocardiogram for a dead person. Then, on Cam 4, the back lot changed. The night light over the dumpster casts a bent cone of grainy white that I have gotten to know intimately, a standing column of fake daylight where moths go to be stupid. A sedan drifted into that cone of light, not a truck, not the regulars, a mid-size silver car. It rolled to a stop. Headlights clicked off. The driver didn't get out. I checked the actual window above the sink to my right, the one that looks out at the same patch of lot. It was empty. I walked to the back door, undid the lower latch, and nudged it open enough to let the cold push its hand flat against my face. The lot was bare, weeds wrestling in the wind, like someone arguing behind a curtain. Nothing. On cam 4, the sedan's driver door opened and a man got out in a dark coat. He moved like someone who wanted to be ordinary and was trying to remember how. He walked around to the passenger side and leaned in, talking. He laughed in a way that looked either tired or apologetic. Then he shut the door and went to the trunk. I stepped into the door frame to triangulate some piece of reality. What would it cost, honestly, to hold two truths in my head at once? The screen said, silver sedan, man in a coat, passenger unseen. The asphalt outside said, empty lot and wind. I pushed the door wider like that would somehow break the spell. The cold did its best to wake me up. It didn't help. On the screen, the man opened the trunk and lifted something out. I felt my body tense like an animal, recognizing the sound of its predator. The man held a cardboard box, no labels, from which he pulled out a small object in plastic wrap. He unwrapped it, careful. The thing in his hands was a camera, a little square with a black eye. He looked at it like a child trying to guess whether a dog would bite. Then he looked up, not at the monitor, not at me. He looked up at the exact camera that was filming him, and he smiled. I let the door latch shut, hard, because some reflex older than me decided I needed a barrier between us. A second later, the latch slammed on the monitor too, the screen shuddering like it felt the same vibration. The man walked out of frame with the camera, and I stood with my forehead against the cool metal of the door and counted to 30. When I looked again, the sedan was gone. The light over the dumpster claimed the same blank cone of concrete it always did. A theater playing to an empty house. I didn't tell anyone. Not that night. What would I say? Hey Marla, the monitors are showing me scenes that don't happen, but they happen anyway. She'd de-roll her eyes and tell me the coffee I've been drinking is the decaf with the wrong label. Besides, the night shift makes you private. You get used to unannounced moments. Coyotes jogging the drainage ditch like runners who took a wrong turn. A couple arguing in the parking lot, using only the parts of speech that hurt a kid. Skateboarding the curb at 3 a.m. as if he was the last boy on earth. You watch them without announcing yourself, and when the sun comes up, you let them go. The third night, the monitors started showing the future. I know you think I'm being dramatic, but I've run it over and over in my head, like a tape you keep rewinding until the sound warps. At 1:37 a.m., on cam 1, the front door swung open and a man stepped in, wearing a work jacket with a narrow reflective stripe. It is a jacket I've seen 100 times on county guys who come in after patching potholes. The kind of yellow that looks like it is trying to shout through a mouthful of gravel. He took off a beanie, ran his hand through flat hair, and walked to the counter. In his left hand was a folded paper map, which already looked like a choice from another time. On the real side of the counter, the bell over the door didn't move. The street outside was a mile of nothing. When I looked back up, the man on the screen had unfolded the map and was pointing at a section that must have been our stretch of highway. He is talking now, his mouth and hands in rhythm, and after a minute, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a wallet on a chain. He took out a photograph and set it next to the map, like he wanted to compare a picture to something drawn by a stranger. At 1:48, still nobody in the door. At 2:02, he waved at where I would be, then let his hand fall. At 2:05, he gathered his things and stepped back toward the door. At 2:06, he put the beanie back on and looked again over his shoulder as if he'd heard someone say his name. And I wanted to tell him, "Don't go, wait, I'm here." Except I wasn't. He left the frame at 2:07. The bell above the door in my world rang at 2:07. I flinched hard enough to splash the spatula in my hand against the backsplash. The man in the reflective jacket came in, took off his beanie, ran his hand through his hair, walked to the counter and unfolded a map that crackled like old leaves. He looked exactly like his ghost had looked 9 minutes ago, down to the way his mouth tightened on the right side when he read, as if the words had splinters. He pointed to our stretch of highway. I walked to him. In the ordinary world where things obey time, he looked up and looked relieved like strangers get when they realize you are, in fact, there. "You do refills," he said. I stared at the coffee. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, of course. Sorry," he added, and he tapped at the map like the paper was at fault. I'm weird about stopping. Keep thinking I'll get turned around if I look too long at where I am going. I poured him a mug and set it down and tried not to look like I knew everything he ought to do next. He reached for his wallet on a chain, took out a photograph, set it next to the map. A girl with a round face and a new driver's license smile. "My niece," he said. "She thinks she saw something out on County 14 last night. A figure in the ditch with lights in its hands." "I don't think we have a County 14, I said, and my voice sounded too careful. He laughed and shook his head. "That's what I mean," he said. "There isn't. But she swears. Kept me on the phone while I was at work until I promised I'd drive it tonight, just to prove to her she dreamed it." He folded the photo back into the wallet and sipped the coffee like it owed him a favor. Then he stared at the map again, like a man trying to remember the face of someone who did him wrong. When he left at 2:06, right on time, I had to lean my hands on the counter for a minute to remind myself where they were. I watched him cross the lot on Camp 4, his figure passing through the cone of light, like a moth that refuses to die, and I wanted to shout through the monitor, "Honesty, pick up the thing in the trunk." Don't want to look up at the camera, don't want to understand too much. I started doing experiments like a person losing softly. I'd switch off the monitors one by one. They'd go dark, and the feeling would move through the diner like the room had exhaled. Then they'd hum back on. The little power light on the side would blink like a slow wink, and the screen would show me what I couldn't survive understanding. Tomorrow in flicker vision. I took a picture with my phone, then another, then video of the loop while it played. The photos showed nothing but static. The video was 5 seconds of scrambled black and white that turned my phone hot to the touch. When I scrolled to the clip, the thumbnail was an empty square that said, "Cannot play." I don't need to know why I expected a different rule for me than for the man with the reflective stripe, but it still felt like the room had closed a door on my fingers. One night around 3, after a rush of high school kids who all smelled like wintergreen gum and secrets, Cam 3, the one pointed down the back hall, flickered to an empty hallway, and then showed the freezer door ajar. It's heavy, and it seals like a bank vault. It never sits ajar. On the screen, the door had a fat strip of black down its left side like a missing tooth. The light inside glowed brighter than it should have, too clean. A different temperature than the rest of the feed. A second later, a box slid out by inches, just enough to let you know it had been moved. Then the door eased shut. No hand on it. No person. I was down that hall in 5 steps. a ridiculous amount of bravery for a man in a stained apron. The freezer door handle felt like something a winter would use to kill you. I pulled. It gave me the terrible creak, like a complaint from inside the metal, and I braced my foot against the frame and opened it wider. Light spilled over me. The temperature bit into my mouth and nose. I looked at the boxes stacked like uneven teeth. Nothing was out of place. I put my hand on a box of mixed vegetables, expecting it to be warm or humming or God knew what. It was just a box. I backed out and bumped the switch with my shoulder, and the door shut with its usual puff of pressure. When I looked up at the monitor again, it showed the door ajar, the light wrong, the box sliding the way you see things in a dream. Exactly as before. Exactly as it would be tomorrow. Exactly as it had never happened. I started writing things down. Times. Names. A description of the woman with the braid and the glove I never touched. A crude drawing of the sedan and the little camera. The man with the reflective stripe. A list of the times the bell rang in sync. A list of the times it didn't. On the back of a ticket pad, I wrote a sentence that came to me like a kind of weather report. The screens are a day ahead when they choose to be. I underlined choose and then scribbled it out, and then rewrote it smaller, like I didn't want to offend something. On the fourth night, the feed showed me. At first, it was just my back at the grill, a familiar geometry. The way my shoulder lifts when I flip a plate of eggs. The way I lean when I listen to the radio through cheap earbuds. I pretend I don't wear. On the monitor, I put a plate under the heat lamp and slid a ticket on the clip and wiped my hands on a towel. I looked tired in a way that was intimate. Then I turned and walked toward the register. My real feet stuck to the floor for a second, like the mop water remembered me. The me on the screen reached for the register and touched the side, where the dip for the key makes a little dimple. He didn't ring anything up. He just put his hand there, like he was trying to read Braille on a machine that never learned to speak. Then he lifted his hand and pressed his fingers to the glass of the pie case and leaned forward. And it looked, for a second, like he was peering through the glass into the dark. I looked at the glass and saw myself, my real self, mirroring the action, like a man caught stealing his own reflection. In the monitor, the other me leaned closer, breath fogging the glass, and then he wrote something with his finger in the fog, quick, like he didn't want the letters to finish, before the thought could become dangerous. I looked up at the screen for the word. The fog made the letters soft. It was 4 characters, maybe 5, drawn like someone writing in a fogged window, in a car that has a heater that works too well. I couldn't read it. I wiped the pie case with the sleeve of my shirt and breathed hard on the glass like a child, then tried to write the same motion with my finger, muscle memory to muscle memory. Nothing came. The word collapsed into smears. On the monitor, the other me turned fast enough that his apron lifted off his leg. He walked to the back hall in a way that felt like he knew whom he'd meet. He disappeared out of frame. On cam 3, I could see the edge of his shoulder as he turned into the hall, then the blankness of the hall itself. He vanished at the later second someone disappears when they step outside the awareness of a machine. The bell over the door rang in the real world. I jerked. A man came in whose face I recognized with the shock of stepping into a family photo where someone is alive again. It was the reflective stripe man, but this time he was covered in road dust like he'd wrestled the county and lost. He came to the counter and set down the photo of his niece and didn't look like a person who had slept since we'd had last spoken. "Sorry," he said. while I handed him coffee out of a body that knew the moves. I went to the place where she said. I swear I did, and I don't know how, but he stopped there, found the edge of his voice, and backed away from it, like the drop surprised him. What did you see? I said. I saw me, he said. I saw me walking along the ditch a minute in front of me, making the same steps, and then I watched me stop and look down, and I watched me point. He spelled the word me out, like it was an accusation he'd never had the nerve to make. I caught up to where he'd stopped, he said, and he swallowed in a way that made my own throat ache. And there was just this hole in the weeds where something had been set down and carried off, square shape. And then I looked up, and I could swear to God there was a little red light there, blinking at me, in the air. And then it was just dark, like it had remembered its job. He finished the coffee in a swallow that made him cough, and then smile reflexively at the pain. I think I'm too tired, he said, and he took his photograph back with a kind of tenderness that made me ashamed to be in the room with it. After he left, I flipped the monitors off and then on again, like I was negotiating with a stubborn child. The screens blinked back to life, and I braced for the sad little hum that has started to sound like my own name. The feeds had jumped forward, the timestamp in the corner, weird little block numbers that freeze sometimes, had skipped 12 hours. Daylight. People who never come in because the diner during the day is for a different species. A woman in scrubs laughing with her whole mouth. A kid in a band hoodie trying to look like he didn't care if the pancakes were burned. A man in a suit placing his phone face down. And then, a second later, flipping it back over like the urge to look is stronger than whatever he planned it to be. The world in brighter gray. And then, at some point in a daylight none of us had earned yet, the screen on Cam 2 showed the corner booth under the neon clock at 2:14. A kid sat there alone. Not a man, not a woman, a teenager with a crew cut trying to grow out. He had a paper bag, and he kept tapping the bottom of it with his fingertips, like there was a heartbeat in there he could wake if he tried. He looked toward the door more than he looked anywhere else, and I knew the feeling. When my shifts run long and I don't have a ride, I look at the door like a miracle editor. The bag wasn't fast food, it wasn't groceries, it was too clean. The top was folded twice, neat, like something precious was inside, and the person who had given it to him had hands that like things to look exact. The kid placed the bag on the window ledge behind him that collects dust like a hobby. He slid it an inch left, an inch right, like the perfect position would let him breathe. I caught myself leaning up into the monitor, like it could tip me forward into the scene, and I made myself step back. The kid sipped a soda that wasn't ours. The ice had that squeak you hear when plastic cups think they can be glass. He sat still for a long time, then took the bag and tucked it into his jacket, like he'd decided not to decide. When he stood up, I thought I saw a thin wire catch the edge of the booth's vinyl, blinking a tiny dot of red as it shifted in the light. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. I waited for that daylight to arrive like a man waits for a phone call he promised himself he wasn't counting on. When it came, bored sunlight in its pockets, the kid came in. He took the corner booth. He had the bag. He did the same slide to the left, to the right, and he drank from the same squeaky plastic. I approached with the casualness I've learned from 100 people who are more scared of being asked whether they all right than they should be of anything else. You okay there? I said, and I tried to make it sound like I was the kind of man who could carry a minute for someone. He nodded without looking. "Waiting for my ride," he said. "Where are you headed?" I said. He shrugged. "Doesn't matter, I guess." My hand did an automatic sweep of the table, sugar, napkin holder, salt clump, and then rested on the bag. He noticed. He pulled it a little closer to his hip, a protective move, not territorial. "You want a water?" I said. "On the house?" "I'm good," he said, and he smiled like an apology. It was the first time he looked at me, and we both recognized something in the other that we didn't each want to say out loud, the same way people like us count exits without knowing. When he left, he didn't put the bag on the ledge. He tucked it exactly as he had in his jacket, precise fold against his ribs, and he held one hand against it, like he was keeping a thought from escaping. The bell over the door rang like all the bells in all the small towns in the country, ringing once, and then he was gone. I watched Cam 4 to see whether a sedan would slide into frame, and a man would look up and smile at me through the camera. Nothing. Empty. Just the cone of light and the moths doing their idiot dance. I told myself to go home and sleep for a day and a half. I told myself to tell Marla that the monitors need to be replaced. I told myself that if a kid came in looking like the Word almost, I should mind my business. The world doesn't need me to run across a lot after a boy with a neat fold. That night, the 5th, felt like the diner had been waiting for me. I unlocked the back door the way I always do. Key in, twist, shove with hip to break the seal. Inhale the mix of fryer oil and lemon cleaner that has come to mean safety. The monitors were already on. I hadn't left them on. They hummed in a way that made my fillings ache. On cam 1, the door opened. The woman with the braid from the first night came in. She moved with a softness that felt like memory being careful. She walked to the counter, third stool from the end, and set her glove on the glass of the pie case. Then she reached into her coat pocket and took out the little metallic thing she'd almost set down days ago. She placed it into the glove like a nest. Then she pushed the glove slowly, carefully, across the glass until it sat exactly below the angle of Cam 1's view. She tilted her head up, not at the monitor, at the camera mounted in the corner, at the unblinking black circle. She raised 2 fingers and with her thumb tapped them once, twice, like a person sending a little code to a person across a room too crowded to cross. She left. I walked to the pie case like someone going to meet their future with a small gift. The glove was there, brown leather, soft with age. Inside, a weight like a small bird. I looked up at the monitor. The glove was visible on cam 1, exactly where it sat in my world. And for the first time, the static around the edges felt less like weather and more like a breath I could count. I reached into the glove and took out the metal object. It was a camera, one of those idiot simple squares you stick in a corner of a bedroom when you don't trust the plumber. A single glass bead of a lens, a tiny port for charging, a place for a memory card. There was a card in it. I shouldn't have, I know that, but I went to the office, plugged the card into the old desktop that wheezes when you ask it to make a new folder, and clicked open the directory. Files named by default. Series 01, 02, 03. I opened the oldest. The black and white frame of the diner's counter, third stool. The clock at 2:14 telling the same lie it tells every day. The woman with the braid sat in profile. The angle was lower than the ceiling cameras, like the view of someone short or crouching. It showed her hands more than her face. She had the glove on, and she was cupping the little camera like it might catch cold. She placed it carefully, like a person laying down a much heavier thing that would hurt if it fell. She looked up. 2 fingers. Tap, tap. Then the file ended. The next file was from the parking lot, an angle I knew like the jawline of someone you worked next to. But this wasn't our mounted Cam 4. The view was too low. It was a camera set somewhere at bumper height, maybe leaning on a rock, the silver sedan in that moth cone. The man smiling up at our mounted camera, at me, with his paper white face in the light. He lifted the little camera from the trunk and held it against his palm, like a coin that can buy you out of a town. He placed it on the ground, stepped back, did that small tap-tap with 2 fingers toward the mounted cam, and then he bent down and picked up the tiny lens again, like he wasn't sure which eye he trusted. I opened the newest file. The screen was dark. Then it caught a shape. Someone's torso leaning very close, then withdrawing. The view stabilized. A boy, the crew cut growing in. He sat in the corner booth. He took a folded paper bag out of his jacket, opened it, and set it carefully on the ledge. He reached inside and removed a second tiny camera. This one with a red wire coiled like muscle. He placed it beside the first, angled them both toward the booth, and then he leaned in and tapped 2 fingers. The code repeating like a password none of us had asked for. He gathered the cameras, slid them back into the bag, and left. The final file was longer, 37 minutes. No sound. It showed the empty diner at night from a low angle. Maybe the same Kid S camera, left in a different corner or something newer that had learned an old secret. After a while, I saw myself in the corner, wiping the same space twice, then staring up at the ceiling cameras the way you look at birds when they all decide at once to turn the same direction. I watched myself go to the register and put my hand on the dimple. I watched myself lean in and fog the glass of the pie case. On screen, the me in the future wrote the word that I couldn't read. The resolution here was better. The letters were crude, but certain. Leave. My stomach dropped as if the floor had shifted under the kitchen tiles. I replayed the clip and paused on the letters. Leave. In a child's handwriting. Or my own, which isn't much better. I wiped the actual pie case glass with the back of my hand, because that felt like something. And then I breathed on it and wrote the word. The fog swallowed it too fast to be useful. On the screen, the future me stepped away, walked down the back hall, vanished. The office computer made a soft sound, and the directory window refreshed. Another file had appeared. I hadn't touched anything. The computer's clock ticked the second over like a tongue saying now. The new file started playing automatically, and the angle was one I hadn't seen from these little cameras. The back hallway, yes, but lower, as if the camera were sitting on the floor. The freezer door stood ajar. A box slid that same impossible inch, and then, from the black crack under the freezer door, a thin line of light pushed out and spread across the floor. Like a blade catching the sun, something moved behind the door. Not a person. The movement was too slow. It was the shift you see when you sit in a dark room and your eyes decide to remember that the dark has organs. The light thinned like it was being drawn back through the crack by hand, and then it disappeared. That's when the back door banged hard enough to make the register ring. I jerked out of the office and into the narrow hallway, where the smell of freezer air meets fryer oil and makes a truce. The back door was shut. The deadbolt sat horizontal like a smile. The metal of the handle was cooling from someone else's hand. I looked up at Cam 3. The hallway was empty. I looked down the hall with my eyeballs, that had lived in this head for decades. The hallway was not at the far end, the freezer door. You could see the faintest line of light where the seal is an entity perfected to the kind of line that says, technically, you could put your fingertip in and pull if you didn't mind pain. As I watched, the line of light thinned to hair, to thread, to nothing. The door made the soft sound of two seals agreeing. I felt the pressure in the air change, the smallest click in your ears when an elevator pretends it isn't moving. I walked toward it because everything in me is built wrong. The floor under my shoes felt like a wooden stage pretending to be tile. When I reached the freezer, I didn't touch the handle. I put my ear to the door. You can hear a lot through a freezer door that the manuals don't mention. Compressors, sure. Ice cracking itself for fun. Fluorescent bulbs humming their unholy song. Under all that, I heard a sound that made the skin along my jaw tighten. It was voices, not words. The shape of conversation, like a radio just out of range. A voice that sounded like the woman with the braid. The sound of a boy breathing through his mouth the way you do when you were trying not to cry. The deep laugh of a man apologizing with his body. I stepped back. I held my hand up in front of my face, unsteady, and laughed a little at the sight of it, because it looked like my father's hand. And I never thought I would live long enough to see that. The bell at the front door rang. I turned, double sound, one in my ear, one in the monitor. I watched Cam 1 as a young mother struggled with a stroller wheel that hated the threshold. She was the kind of woman who has decided to wear her hair in a ponytail for 1 year straight so that she can accomplish anything at all. She apologized to the empty room like she always did, and then smiled at the baby like that would make the apology true. She didn't look up at the monitors. She didn't see me standing in the hall like I'd just been told a joke in a language I recognized but had never learned. I held onto the ticket rail and walked the way you do, on a boat that wants you to fall once so it can feel better. Morning, I managed, though it was a lie. I made her coffee and a plate of pancakes that the baby would mash, with the kind of joy that doesn't last long enough, and I let the two of them be the reason that time exists. I cleared their plates and refilled her coffee and did not look at the hallway behind me more than 3 times. When they left, I went back to the office and looked at the computer. Another file had appeared. The timestamp in the name had a date that matched tomorrow. I didn't click it. I unplugged the card reader. I put the little cameras back in the glove. I set the glove exactly where the woman had placed it, under the angle of Cam 1. If you ask me why, I can't offer an answer that would pass any test. It felt important. It felt like a relay. That night, before my shift, I drove the back roads that parallel 24, and I found a County 14 because of course there is a County 14 if you decide hard enough. I pulled over where the ditch widens and the drainage pipe stands like a mouth with a ring of rust. I rolled the window down. The dark felt like a lid pulling itself tight on a jar. I waited, half expecting to see myself step into the scene. A man that looks like me walking a minute in front of me, pointing at a square dent in weeds. That meant a camera had been there. That meant a boy had stood here. That meant a woman had tapped 2 fingers at a mounted eye. I didn't see myself. A coyote did its little trot across the road, unconcerned. In the rearview mirror, the sky had a bruise where the town pretends it can be future-proof. I went to work. The back door latch stuck like always. I hip-checked it. The monitors were on. Cam 1 showed an empty counter. Cam 2 held the cone of the heat lamp, like a halo, where nobody would ever stand long enough to deserve it. Cam 3 watched the hall that pretends to be shorter than it is. Cam 4 showed the lot. Nothing in it but a moth constellation and the dumpster's square shoulder. For the first hour, I worked with the screens off. I did it because I wanted to see if my heart could remember its old tempo. It couldn't, but it tried. I kept the glove on the pie case where the camera could watch it. At one point, a man in a baseball cap pointed and said, "Somebody forget that." I said, "We're holding it," which is a true thing you can say about almost anything you love. Around 2:10, Cam 1 blinked. It didn't jump, it didn't cut. It blinked like a human eye. The image of the counter softened and cleared. The glove sat exactly where it sat on the glass. And then it moved, not across the glass, but in time. An older version of the glove appeared under it for a second. A younger one, too, as if the frame had drawn the same object in different positions over itself, and was now deciding which to choose. After a heartbeat, the glove that belonged to No stayed and the rest were gone. The bell rang. The boy came in. He had a different jacket. He sat in the corner booth, like he had remembered a safer version of himself that always sits there. He didn't have the bag this time. He had empty hands and shoulders that were held too high, like someone had hung a coat hanger across his neck, and he hadn't yet remembered to take it out. I brought him water. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded and didn't look at me. "You got a bathroom?" he said. I pointed down the back hall. He stood and went. The bell didn't mean anything anymore. It rang for all of us and none of us. On Cam 3, I watched him reach the end of the hall and looked left toward the freezer door. He stopped there a second too long, like he felt the half-degree difference in the temperature of the air. Then he continued to the restroom and vanished from the frame. The freezer door drifted, not open, not closed, just enough to let you think about it. I walked down the hall with a receipt spike in my hand, like a weapon from a life where danger announces itself. I put my palm against the freezer door, and it didn't fight me. I opened it. Light, boxes, the smell of coal that belongs to fruit that was cut by someone who stopped thinking about their hands a long time ago. I stepped inside and let the door begin to ease toward closed, the way it always does when you forget that heavy things remember their job. My hand on the door, shoulder inside, so I could step back if the compressor kicked in. Something moved behind the stack of fry bags. I felt it the way you feel a gnat in a room you thought was empty. "Hey," I said, because hey is the human word for everything from dawn to be scared to I am about to make a mistake. The top of the stack shifted. A space behind the bags widened, an improvised aisle, a thin crawl space you don't see until it calls its own name. I stepped sideways. Behind the stack, the freezer wall wasn't a wall. It was another door. A simple panel cut into the metal. No handle, just a seam. For 10 years I'd worked here and never noticed it, because I had never once stood exactly where I was standing now, and looked with the kind of noticing that is half begging. The seam had 2 little crescents near the top, a place where someone with 2 fingers could tap twice. I did it. 2 fingers. Tap, tap. The seam eased wider like a mouth deciding to speak. Cold breathed out over my face. Inside, a narrow space no deeper than a closet, lined with shelves. On the middle shelf, a small field of cameras. Old, new, some still in plastic wrap, some with smudges where fingers had gripped them too hard. A small lamp glowed at the top of the little space, a different temperature of light than the freezer, clean and steady. And on the bottom shelf, 2 folders labeled in pencil, day And night. I reached for night because I am the man I am. Inside, pages of screenshots printed from security feeds. The diner, the lot, the hall, angles I didn't recognize that belonged to other places. Some had dates written in a steady hand. Some had check marks. Some had the word done stamped in red like a joke about how little gets finished in this world. In the back, a sheet with a list of names. A column of dates next to the names. Some with double lines, some with small notes like 2 taps and won't look up and glove. At the bottom of that list, my name, Eddie. Next to it, tonight's date. Next to that, a blank space, as if whoever kept these notes had run out of nerve. I heard a click behind me that was not freezer noise. It was the small click of the restroom lock. The boy was coming back down the hall. I slid the folder back where it had been. I touched the cameras with the tips of my fingers, like you do when you have to be sure a thing is there, even though you should not ever have known it existed. I pulled the panel closed. It settled into the seam with the softness of something practiced. I stepped out from behind the stacks and let the freezer door come toward me and nudged it the last inch. The latch took a breath and closed. The boy stood at the end of the hall looking at me, his shoulders high. "Sorry," he said, "for the sin of existing. It's fine," I said. "You want a slice of pie?" He smiled, quick, like I'd told a joke that only lived in the timing. "Yeah," he said. "Lemon, if you have it." We sat at the counter, the same third stool because fate has no imagination. And I set the plate down, and we both pretended we weren't listening to the hum in the air that I now knew belonged to more than one machine. I wanted to ask him if he knew the 2-tap code. I wanted to ask him who had given him the bag, who had told him to put cameras at angles that show the places where your choices narrow. Instead, I said, "You're not waiting for anyone, are you?" He shook his head and forked a perfect triangle of pie and held it in his mouth like he was trying to memorize sweet. "No," he said. "I just wanted to sit where I sat once and felt okay." He finished the pie. He thanked me in a voice that had to climb up out of him. He left the diner the way people leave small, true places, with a glance back that hurts both the glancer and the place. The bell rang. The door latched. On cam 1, a second later, I watched the earlier version of him do the same move, and it broke me in the precise way that knowing breaks you. The glove still sat on the pie case. I touched it. It felt like a steady hand extended in the dark. I could keep cataloging hour by hour, but by now you understand the shape of the thing. The monitors show the day to come when they want to. The little cameras move through the lives of people like a signal looking for a repeater. The freezer has a panel that makes room for the devices that allow the diner to sit at the bend in time where it catches the drift and pulls it forward. People leave each other small signs, 2 taps, a glove, a red light, a square dent in weeds. We watch the version of ourselves that is 1 minute ahead, and sometimes we listen, and sometimes we don't. I started writing on the glass of the pie case every night. Not always leave, sometimes wait, sometimes not yet. I don't know who reads it. Maybe it's me on a different night with a mind more willing to take the advice. Maybe it is someone who pulls off the highway and stands under our broken sign and thinks they've found a place where the rules are suspended for the price of hash browns. A week after I found the panel, the woman with the braid came in for real. No monitor trick. The bell rang once, and she laughed at herself for fighting the door. And she sat at the counter and thanked me for the coffee like I had invented the word. The glove on the pie case wasn't hers, I realized. The glove belongs to the place. I asked her nothing of consequence. She asked me how the lemon is so bright in the pie. I gave her a lie that was almost true. 2 fingers tap on the glass when she stood to go, not at the camera, but at me. That same night, the man with the reflective stripe came in again. He sat and didn't order. He set his niece's photo on the formica like a saint card. He looked at the monitors and then looked away. He tapped 2 fingers on the counter, once, twice, like someone sending gratitude to a person who never asks to be thanked. She made it home, he said. She took a different road. She says she doesn't know why, but she did. I wanted to tell him about the panel, about the cameras, about how the freezer hums with a second heartbeat. I wanted to say, leave, in the voice of the man who wrote it in the fog, so that I could be the reason someone chooses the door and the days that follow. Instead, I poured him coffee and watched the steam, like it was handwriting. I don't know who set it up, the panel and the cameras, the feed that willingly lies in our favor. I don't know why the screens pick some nights to show me what I can barely carry, and other nights to show me only my own tired back. I don't know how long I'll keep writing on the glass before someone, Marla, the health inspector, the universe, asks me to stop. I don't know if I'm helping anyone but myself, but this is what I know. Sometimes the diner is a station in the middle of a track that curves through days out of order. Sometimes the cooks and the kids and the women with braids carry things for each other without having to know what those things are. Sometimes you take a camera out of a glove and you place it where it can do its one trick, and you look up at the unblinking eye and you tap 2 fingers to say, I see you, I'm here. Not yet. Wait. Leave. It is almost dawn. As I say this, the neon 214 is lying again. The lot is empty except for a moth with ambitions and a dumpster dreaming it is a cliff. The monitors are quiet, but they will not stay that way. I think in a few minutes, a sedan will pull into the cone of light, and a man will step out and look up and smile at the mounted camera, because he has decided he will not be afraid of the idea that he twinned himself. I think a kid will sit at the booth and breathe and remember how to be a person. I think the glove will remain on the pie case, and I will put my hand on the glass and write a word no one asked for. When I finish my shift and step into the parking lot, the cold will do the old trick of trying to bargain. The highway will pull at me like a rope. A day will begin somewhere else, and it might be yesterday or tomorrow, or a day that never was. I will walk to my car and I will not look up at the camera. I will tap 2 fingers against my thigh just once, and I will believe for a little while that the screens and the hands that place things where they need to be are on our side, and if they are not, if they are only a mirror the universe uses to check its own face before walking out the door, I will still write on the glass before I leave. Wait, because sometimes the mercy you get is the one you give to yourself 2 minutes early, on a night when the diner holds you and the future lets you try again.